Good morning. Yes, my name is Josh Garton. I'm the Technical Director at the Green Finance Institute, an organisation that works at the intersection of investors, industry and government to catalyse investment in net zero and nature-based sectors, which we've been doing on SAF for the last few years. Yes, as Oscar said, we're here to talk about EFuels, in search of the holy grail of sustainable aviation fuel. And just as a bit of a reminder of why we term it that way is that, as you'll all know, SAF is the best option we have for decarbonising aviation over the long term, over the next 15 years through to 2040. Because of its capacity to be a drop-in fuel, it can be used to drop into existing aircraft flying today and those second generation, next generation aircraft that will be flying tomorrow. So it's obviously the best opportunity we have for decarbonising aviation, but obviously the first and second generation fuels, the bio-type fuels, have some level of constraint on the feedstocks that they require to obviously produce those fuels. And because they're based on biomass and different waste streams, there's obviously a natural constraint on that, which means that when we think about scaling SAFs to the level that we need to decarbonise global aviation, there really is a constraint that limits those fuels' capacity to do that. And this is where EFuels come in. They have relatively unconstrained source of feedstocks, given their relatively simple carbon dioxide, water and renewable energy primary inputs, means that they can meet that demand and solve the holy grail of aviation decarbonisation through to 2040. But importantly, it's also a really big innovation opportunity. Those technology companies that are able to develop the technologies today that can power the e-fuel production of the future have a real opportunity in front of them. And secondly, e-fuels also offer a very promising energy security option in that they can be produced regionally and remove that reliance on foreign imports, which means there's a real opportunity for energy security there. But before we get into it, I'll go to the panel to introduce themselves. So firstly, Andy.
Yeah, thanks Josh, and thanks to SAF Investor for the opportunity to join the panel again today. I'm with Arcadia EFuels. Some of you know us, some of you don't. For those who don't, just a quick update in terms of what we've been doing actually over the last year. I was fortunate enough to be on a similar panel last year. We have 3 active projects worldwide at the moment. It's a pure play EFuels company. We're developing a 2,000 barrel a day or 80,000 tonne per annum standard project platform. Our most advanced project, we've finished FEED. So one of the few commercial scale e-fuel developers to actually have FEED level definition on the technical proposition for building a commercial scale e-fuels facility. We're putting together the commercial package to be able to take that project to financial close over the next 6 to 12 months. UK project, which is what I'm primarily responsible for, we've benefited from Advanced Fuels Fund support. We've finished our pre-FEED stage and we're putting together a finance package to move that project into FEED with the potential and the opportunity to take FID on that in early 27. And our final project in Texas in the US, we were fortunate enough to win FAST, $12 million of FAST grant funding for that project late last year. That project is also concluding pre-FEED and looking to move forward into FEED over the coming months. So that's Arcadia. Thank you.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Andrew Symes. I'm co-founder and CEO of OXCCU. We're a spin-out from Oxford. We're focused on a novel Fischer-Tropsch catalyst that can work with CO2. The key thing is that we can actually directly convert CO2 and hydrogen into long-chain hydrocarbons. We can also work with CO2 and hydrogen. So it's a disruptive technology. The sole purpose of what we are doing is trying to get the cost of SAF down. I think everyone knows that there's big demand out there. The key thing is it, can we get that cost down? And that's really what we're focused on. We've ultimately got ultimately planning on licensing our technology, but we have a demonstration plant up and running in Oxford Airport, and we're building a bigger one and hopefully going to be licensing this out before the end of the decade. So thank you.
Hi, good morning. Lucas Prat from Power2X. A bit hard to miss at this conference. Part of the executive team and the team that also raised the capital from CPPIB, so the Canadian Pension Plan. We're into large-scale industrial decarbonization of transport and heavy industry. We have two businesses, a SAF and methanol business and a industrial hydrogen business. I'm working on the SAF and methanol business in the market for sourcing nearly 1 megaton of clean methanol to convert that into eSAF, could also be biosAF, but primarily eSAF. And yeah, we're aimed to get to FID around 27 to be up and running by 2030. So I think at this bench we could make the EU mandates happen by 2030.
Hi everybody, I'm Vanessa Lowe. I'm a VP in the Energy Structured Finance team at Santander. So Santander, we're a leading lender. I think last year we were #1 globally for renewables financing and #2 across all infrastructure classes in terms of capital deployed for debt finance. So we play quite a relevant role in the space and in the sector. Myself, I focus on energy transition technologies, including SAF, which is a key area of focus for us. We're advising a number of different sustainable aviation fuel projects as debt advisor, and we're also hoping to participate as a lender, of course, in some SAF projects in the very near term.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is David Lloyd. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer for Emerging Fuels Technology. We're a provider of Fischer-Tropsch technology. You can think of us as the Intel inside for a number of SAF projects, both biogenic and eSAF projects, including 12, which has been subject of some of the discussions over today and yesterday.
Great, thank you all. So we'll get into the discussion, but firstly, please feel free to submit any questions that you have to the panel and we'll try and get to them. So firstly, let's look at the supply side of the equation and those critical feedstocks that are required to produce eSAF. What are the real challenges in accessing those feedstocks, and which parties are best able to carry those challenges? Andy.
Yeah, sure. It's a great question, actually, because often we go straight to the revenue end of the business model and focusing on how do we get, and we've spoken a lot about revenue certainty, confidence in kind of from a bankability and investability point of view. But I think it was raised in one of the panels yesterday, again, the importance of feedstocks. You can't produce product without feedstock. So I guess the one positive thing about EFuels and about eSAF is the feedstock slate is very simple. We need lots of green electrons, we need lots of biogenic carbon dioxide, and we need water. So you kind of start from that point of view. Well, it should be relatively simple. There's nothing too exotic in there. If I talk about how we kind of approach it from an Arcadia point of view, we kind of look at it through two lenses. We look at it through security of supply first and foremost. You've got to have security of supply. If the feedstock's not there, you can't produce the product. And then you have to look at the cost of supply, because we obviously have to be cost conscious and mindful about trying to produce our product for as competitive and as low a price as is practicable. I think to look at a couple of the challenges in this area. So the biggest challenge, I would say, is in the delivered price. So it's the cost of supply for the renewable electrons, and that's not because there aren't lots of renewable electrons available. The UK has got a very deep pipeline of renewable generation projects, be those onshore wind, offshore wind, solar, hydro, and other emerging technologies. The challenge in the eFuel space in the UK is one that's policy driven, because it's around the very, very strict sustainability criteria that are necessary to achieve the carbon intensity in the final product, because all of our carbon intensity, we have a fully electrified flow sheet, so all of the carbon intensity comes from the carbon intensity of the electrons that we use. So there are some very technical terms around things like additionality and temporal correlation and the requirement to avoid congestion and so on. The net result of that is it drives up the delivered power price at the factory gate. So when we look at trying to price our primary feedstock, which is 360 megawatts of of power, one, we can't get it all renewable, so we trying to get the maximum amount of maximum renewable content is our focus, because that's what drives the business case. But the delivered price, the price premium that comes with those sustainability criteria is not insubstantial, and we have no choice. The policy as it stands, we have to comply with it. So what we're kind of looking at the opportunity side of that, and then I'll maybe let some of the other panelists kind of contribute. Is we're not a power market specialist. We are an EFuels specialist. We're a technology integrator. So we can either try and build deep power market in the locations we're operating kind of capability or expertise, or we have to find ways of working with those who already know how to do it. Now, no one produces our product, so if anyone tells you, if a supplier tells you they've got an off-the-shelf feedstock package for an EFuels facility in the UK, tell me about it, because we haven't found it. So what we're trying to do is find effectively strategic partners who understand this market better than we do and can help us put together the right supply package. So that's the kind of the opportunity side of what is actually quite a pretty big challenge. But I'll kind of pause there.
Thank you, Andy. Andrew, you have a view on this?
I mean, hydrogen is one part of the equation, obviously, and it's a challenge. And certainly the power requirement is a challenge in Europe and the UK. But there are places where we've now seen good renewables resources and costs coming down, and electrolyzers scaling. I would say that the other challenge is around the carbon, and I do think the EU made a significant mistake by requiring biogenic CO2 in 2041, because it essentially brings e-fuels into the biofuel type space, essentially constrains the main sites to be ethanol plants, sugar plants that are, essentially fairly limited-ish. I mean, they're quite big, but it brings e-fuels very closely back to the biofuel industry. When I think back of the purpose and the case for e-fuels, it was all around finding a way of getting over the issues with land use, which will always be there for all biofuels. If you can go to sunny places where you have CO2 that's already being emitted and you turn that into a fuel, it's a lower carbon fuel. It's not perfect. No one should say it is, but it certainly has less land use impact compared to the biofuels. So by saying biogenic CO2 in 2041, everyone is now looking at essentially, going next to, ethanol plants and sugar plants, maybe AD, but it definitely constrains the carbon side, and then you've got the hydrogen side as well. So I do think, I wish that could be addressed. In the UK, thankfully, it's agnostic, but I think there needs to be a bit more pragmatism. We emit 38 billion tons of CO2 a year. Only a few % of that would be enough to do aviation, and essentially it would have ACI, and it would be potentially not as good as some biofuels, but biofuels CIs are always going to be complicated because you look at land use. Should Brazil make all the biofuels for the world or not, or should we protect the Amazon? Should we use corn ethanol? There's huge questions there that are very, very difficult to answer, but e-fuels is another option that could be added to the mix with slightly less complication.
Thank you, Andrew. And David, from your unique perspective from the other side of the world, what's your view on this?
Well, I have two unique perspectives. One is being Australian, as you might hear from the accent, and we obviously have vast amounts of land, sun and wind, but it is still a challenge to get sufficient green, to get the green energy. That is going to be the constraint on PTL, is just the sheer supply of electrons meeting the regulations, which were explained there as well. So I've got another view on feedstocks as well, and this relates to what Andrew was just saying about biogenic. We're developing our own PTL projects, but we cheat. Why do things the hard way? It takes a lot of energy to split water to make your green hydrogen. We take the easy way. We start with biomethane, which is actually very plentiful, very scalable, and it takes 1/7 of the amount of electricity to split. So I think part of the answer is start looking at other feedstocks and scale the technologies until we can drive down that cost where we can actually afford to get into things like direct air capture of CO2 and pay for expensive hydrogen electrolyzers to split the water and use electricity until that becomes plentiful and cheap as well.
Thank you. So moving on, that's the supply side of the equation. If we start to think about the production of ESAF beyond the supply side, what are the key challenges beyond feedstocks? And with the mandates coming into effect here in the UK and EU, how likely are we going to be able to meet those mandated volumes for ESAF? Lucas.
Yes, I think, as I already concluded, I think our project can do 275 kilotons by 2030. I think with Arcadia and maybe one or two others, we can meet the 2030 mandates. And building a couple of more, so 6, you can have until 2035. So it's not an unrealistic number of supply projects that we need. We already see roughly $500 million of private capital going into independent developers pushing these projects. I think ultimately what's important is the line of sight of affordability. So I think all the projects need project finance. Basically, in 5 to 10 years, we're trying to replicate what Earth has done in 1 billion years. So obviously, the first costs are going to be higher. I think post-2040, we see a more rapid decline in prices. So there needs to be line of sight of an affordable, large-scale decarbonized aviation sector. So I think that's one. I think the second one is the willingness of airlines to commit. I think we hear no issues or some issues of committing to 10-year contracts. The willingness of airlines to commit to that is there. I think there is a business case to move early, and the penalties from not moving at pace far outweigh the benefits of committing early. So in theory, you could say, yeah, the supply side is willing, there's capital, there's a long-term line of sight, and there's industry willingness. However, there's two things at least. The first mover advantage for airlines to commit is not large enough. So the incentives on revenue certainty and affordability, it's not large enough to justify that. And I think there's also a segment of the market that has done a great job in propelling the HEFA SAF, the oil majors. I think they have if you look at the current supply of HEFA, it's all the oil majors. But their business case currently, there's a bigger downside from moving early than there's an upside for those parties. Now, that might change, and I think we are working with all of them to see what we can do. But yeah, making the business case for all these parties, it's going to be essential to unlock that.
Yeah, it's a good point. Vanessa, do you have a view on this?
Yeah, I mean, just to pick up on the point that Lucas mentioned, that these projects are going to require project finance. Look, I tend to agree with that view. Clearly, there's a large scale up here to happen, and it's going to be very capital intensive. And debt finance is going to play a very relevant role in terms of enabling that deployment and that capital formation for the projects. Of course, whenever you bring project finance and you bring lenders into a deal, you bring along all of the requirements of the banks in terms of bankability. So all of the other points that that we've been discussing in this panel and on other panels in this conference, the offtake, the feedstock, the technology performance, all of those need to be viewed through a lens of bankability. And I think that securing some of the terms that are going to be required by lenders, that is, long-term agreements, fixed pricing, performance wraps on technology, all of those things are going to be challenging for projects to negotiate, to a degree that is going to be suitable for lenders. And some projects will have pressure points in some areas more than others. So I would say probably, and I think this question is around the challenges, so I'll save my mitigations, but I think for me, project finance is essential, but projects actually getting to the point of being considered bankable is going to be a key challenge. And maybe the other point that's relevant, particularly for ESAF versus other types of SAF, is around the profile, and this is a generalization, but a lot of the players in the ESAF sector are the more sort of agile, smaller companies doing really innovative things, which is clearly fantastic to see. But of course, when it comes to raising project finance, lenders are looking for those really strong sponsors with deep pockets. So you do have a lot of developers who are in parallel, not only looking to raise debt finance, but seeking the right equity investment from the right sponsors in order to provide some of that comfort to lenders, which can end up being a slightly circular process. So that's just another dynamic, I think, to consider for ESAF specifically.
Thank you, Vanessa. So yeah, we've lots of talk about offtake. There's always offtake.
Sorry, Josh. Could I just very briefly just add just a couple of points to that around key barriers to scaling point, and can we meet the mandates? I mean, Lucas, I think you kind of said the EU mandates within touching distance, in terms of the power to liquid sub-mandate, but the clock is ticking. If projects don't take FID this year or next year, then the mandate won't be met. I don't think will be met. The UK mandate won't be met in 2028. It certainly won't be met from domestic production. There may be some hidden international production that's going to come in, but so the point in terms of kind of barriers to scaling and meeting those mandates is that we need to get on with it. We need to stop talking about it and doing it. And through doing it, we can demonstrate as an industry, as a subsector, that we can actually build these complex plants. We can manage the technology risk that exists, and that we can operate them safely and reliably, because that's the sort of track record that will then talk to the agenda that Vanessa's kind of touching on there around confidence and delivery. So I think it's kind of there is an element of urgency here. If we are serious, and we need to be serious about power to liquids, SAF and EFuels more generally, we're running out of time to talk. We need to get cracking.
There's a question on the screen there that sort of touches on that around mandated markets, and the question is there a business case for e-fuels outside of mandated markets? Unless production costs come way down, who will voluntarily pay that extra cost? Is that an import-export question, or is there a genuine case for it in non-mandated markets? Anyone want to jump in on that one? David.
The US is sort of the case study in that, because it is not mandated. It's all obviously voluntary. And if you look at the two most noteworthy the two most advanced projects in the US, which are 12 mentioned here earlier, and Infinium, most of their ESAF is heading this side of the pond for very good reason. We've had airlines in America say to us outright that they will not pay a premium for even biosaf over fossil jet, and that goes doubly for ESAF, except in very small and some very small and conspicuous cases. But in general, they're not looking to ramp up supply and pay that massive premium.
That's a good example. Anyone else want to come in on that? Or?
I think there's still an opportunity. If you look at the EU, I think the UK is different with the CI mechanism. So the RFMBO requirement is 70%. Our ESAF can do 90 to 95%. Is there a way to monetize that excess carbon reduction? Or will we use to lower the price? So that might also possibly play into the voluntary market. But I think, currently complying with the mandated volumes, that's the first priority.
Just to add very briefly, certainly from our experience, so there is interest. There's actually a lot of strong interest from the voluntary markets. We spend a lot of time talking to freight operators. So we talk a lot about passenger, kind of passenger flight, but there's a big chunk of freight flight. We've got private jets. We've got other kind of subsectors there. So there is interest, and why would they pay for it? So I think there's a supply chain element here around the genuine carbon intensity reduction, that it's hard to hide, or it's hard to muddy the waters with power to liquids and ESAF. It has the potential to be effectively zero carbon intensity. There is still a lot of nervousness, for first and second generation biofuels about what the actual true carbon intensity benefit is from those fuels. And that's not me being critical of anyone who's active in that space, because I know companies are doing a great job. But Andrew's touched on implied land use change and things like that. We don't really properly account for this. So there are voluntary markets out there who are absolutely laser focused on the carbon intensity proposition from e-fuels. They're not over the line yet in terms of the pricing, but there is definitely interest.
Yeah, I mean, just building that, I mean, we're not at all anti-biofuels here. I mean, we would need it all. What we're saying, though, is it's complicated. It always will be complicated with biofuels. With e-fuels, it can be much simpler. You've got a CO2 source that's already being emitted. You're converting that to another fuel, getting another use out of it. That is quite a simple proposition. So it is the land use thing, for me, that will essentially drive e-fuels over biofuels.
it goes back to that point around the constraint on biofuel feedstocks and sustainability requirements. So moving on.
Can I add one thing on the voluntary?
Yes.
So to the freight customers' point, I think there's also a part of where they're not mandated suppliers, but still have to buy kerosene. I think there's a big risk for them that they end up paying for the penalties that their suppliers are, because their suppliers are not meeting the obligations, and they're kind of sitting ducks at those airports, that they cannot influence that. So that they are looking ways to reduce that risk. So I don't know if you call that voluntary or not, but I think that's a key concern that the airlines have.
Very good. So moving forward, we always talk about offtake as being a critical element in getting these projects through FID. And clearly with ESAF, as has been alluded to, the cost of production is a lot higher than bio-based fuels. It's sort of 5 to 8 times that of fossil kerosene plus ETS. So, it's got a very high cost of production. How do we bridge that green premium? What are the policy levers that are out there that can best bridge that green premium? Andy, would you like to come in there?
Yeah, sure. The first thing I'll say is actually I had a real smile on my face when Jean earlier on this morning said, I don't like the term green premium. I hate the term green premium for the same reasons as he mentioned. And the example I always use is no one talks about a green premium when they fill their fuel tank up at the petrol station or the diesel station, by putting, kind of B7 or, kind of E10. It's just the cost of fuel. That's what it is. So I think I understand the point, which is that there is a price differential, but I agree with Jean completely. Green premium doesn't work for me. I think the kind of bridging that gap, as of today, I think it's about making the policy that's been announced, certainly from a UK point of view, it's making it stick. And making it clear that it is going to stick. There is going to be no dilution of mandates, that the mandates will be progressive. I think there is, I won't go into the details here, those who are familiar with the sector will know, and the Department for Transport have acknowledged there are challenges, with the power-to-liquid SAF business model for domestic production in the UK. We need to solve those urgently. Acknowledging the problem is step one, fixing the problem is step two. So we're very encouraged by the engagement that we and the industry as a whole are having with DFT, but we need to fix that. We're not going to fix it overnight, but we need to establish the direction of travel, because establishing the direction of travel will help build confidence in the risk capital that we need to take these projects to kind of FID. Jonathan Council mentioned obviously the RCM and the criticality of delivering that, not only in a timely manner, but delivering it with quality, because it's a very complicated contractual instrument, but it's a very important contractual instrument. And I think just to take the opportunity to pick up on a point that was raised by others earlier around making sure the RCM supports competitive, kind of projects. And I got that, took the point well noted around the polluters should pay, but the polluters shouldn't be penalised. I think governments have to take a whole economy look at power-to-liquids, SAF projects, not just the aviation piece in isolation, because the whole economy benefit in the UK for power-to-liquid SAF is not just building a SAF project, it's about all the upstream and downstream investment that's needed to enable that. So we might spend nearly £2 billion in our facility in the UK, but the supply chains to meet that, to deliver renewable electricity, carbon dioxide, to take the product off and blend it and supply it, you're going to double that at least, possibly triple it in some cases. So it's a whole economy approach to make, but equally understanding that the aviation sector shouldn't necessarily carry the entire, kind of the entire burden for that.
Anyone else want to come in on that?
I mean, just to add a sort of, from our perspective, technology plays a huge role here. When we think about what we're being asked to do, we're being asked to essentially take feedstocks which have one carbon atom, so carbon dioxide, or in the case of advanced biofuels, often carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide, along with hydrogen, and then convert that into ideally only, or at least with high selectivity, 8 carbons in a row, 9 carbons in a row, 10 carbons in a row, up to 16 carbons in a row with branching. That is an extraordinary difficult thing, actually. It's not trivial, and there's lots of different ways you can do it. But catalysis can massively help improve these processes. Traditional refineries, they produce a huge suite of products. We need to produce one single product, ideally, because it massively improves the economics. And people say that, it's all proven pathways. There's so much more that can be done to improve the selectivity and the hydrogen efficiency of all these things. When you think about used cooking oil, you start with something with between 14 and 22 carbon atoms. You're not building any change. You're converting that into diesel and jet fuel. Very, very different. Here, we're building up change. Even when you start with ethanol, you've got 2 carbons. You've got to end up with 8 to 16 carbons. So, it's quite new processes, and catalysis technologies can play a massive role in improving the selectivity and getting the cost down.
Yeah, I think if you look at the whole chain, it's a large capital deployment from solar and wind upstream all the way down to the conversion to jet. So getting the financing cost down to all kind of instruments, tax, export credits, etc. I think that's one element. I think pricing in the energy security and diversification from fossil is something that's currently not priced in, and I think governments don't really have a clue what the benefits are and how they can support that. But for example, in our facility we can also run all kinds of methanol, even fossil methanol, so you can also produce fossil kerosene, so you can diversify your supply chain from your current crude oil.
I completely agree. I think these sort of cost optimizations are going to be very important, but equally, I think even if you're just thinking about the UK, to keep it simple, the gap between the produced cost of ESAF and the current buyout price for ESAF is still quite a significant gap. So from my perspective, a revenue certainty mechanism is absolutely critical for these projects in order to bridge that gap between cost of production and achievable offtake price. And from a financing perspective, it's extremely helpful to have that support for the long-term security of the revenues, but there are a few things that have to be considered. I think one which has already been covered is around sort of certainty of this coming in and timing, so as to not delay projects any more than they need to be. But another aspect is that if we're looking at a contract for difference with a fixed strike price, particularly for ESAF projects, it's very, very critical that the project is able to demonstrate that all of the components that go into their fixed strike price can actually be fixed from a contractual perspective. It's going to be a key area of concern and focus from lenders. And I think as we've discussed, some of these long-term feedstock contracts, for example, on the green electron side, fixing those price points so over a long duration of 10 to 15 years, that can either be very challenging to achieve or if achievable, can also be very costly for the project. So there is a bit of a tension there in terms of there are a lot of benefits of introducing RCM, and clearly I'm very supportive of that, but it is something to consider in terms of the other impacts that it has on bankability and what that means for the project structure.
Look, I think the panel's pretty well covered that topic, so I won't add anything there. I'm just going to pick up one of the questions there, which is a itch I need to scratch. The person saying, if you start with biomethane, it's not an e-fuel, to state the obvious. Well, smarty pants, if you'd like to speak to me at any time, I'll explain how if you split the methane with renewable electricity and use CO2 from a different source, it does indeed qualify as an e-fuel. But I'll save that for a different time.
Thank you, David. And whilst we're at it, there's another potentially contentious question there that we'll put to the group to see what kind of bite we get. There is a trend towards methanol to jet. Will Fischer-Tropsch projects survive? I'll leave that to anyone to take that.
Wow, I probably should take that. I mean, look, there's different pathways, right? And as I said before, this hasn't been done before. We're starting with C1, carbon dioxide, carbon hydrogen, and we've got to make, CH-C16. There are different routes of doing it. It's going to be a competition. We definitely haven't got two proven only ways of doing it. There's a lot of innovation that's going to happen here. And at the end of that, we probably don't end up with only one thing winning. There's probably different pros and cons to each. So yeah, I think I don't agree with that at all, but I would say that.
I will add to that if I may. I would also say that being an FT provider, I don't think there is actually a trend, but one of our competitors who's not represented here, Topso, interesting company. They deal both. They are. Sorry, we've got a hand waved. I was at a Topso conference late last year. They did a very interesting analysis lining up MTJ versus FT, and they're, as I say, one of the few companies that have experience in both. And they came down on the side of FT, both for its cost efficiency and its carbon efficiency. But I just haven't seen a trend towards MTJ. As I say, most of the flagship projects are still FT. And to Andrew's point, there's a huge amount of innovation out there, and not just in the FT part of the process, but particularly upstream of the FT, taking those feedstocks, the H2O and the CO2, and converting them into syngas. We're working with several companies who are looking at very innovative ways, and if you look at what Andrew's company does, the way they're directly hydrogenating the CO2, that's a great form of innovation as well. So FT's got a long way to run.
Yeah, I think we're happy to work with everyone. I think one of the benefits we see from methanol to jet is you can place it close to the demand centers. So our facility has actually blending and dropping capabilities into the SAP's pipelines. We are also happy to work with feedstocks projects that then can bring the product to Rotterdam, and we work together. So I think we're happy to work together with all of them. And I think what I like about the industry is the collaboration to get it done, and rather than compete and having discussions of what's better. So I think we need all of it.
Yeah, I think the critical point is that it's a nascent industry. We don't want to pre-select technologies before we've allowed a lot of options to come through so that we can get the best technologies to float to the top. Another question there, again, a bit controversial that I'll put to the group. In terms of dollar per abated tonnes of CO2, are EFuels cost effective compared to using green electricity to decarbonise other sectors directly? Anyone want to take that one?
I'll start. So there is it's a good question, and most of the analysis suggests that the best use case for renewable electrons at the moment is not to put it into synthetic fuels. There are bigger fish to fry. But the issue is that in many respects, that aviation doesn't really have a choice. Well, it is facing a choice, and the choice aviation's facing is twofold. So there will be first generation, there'll be second generation SAF, and then the balance is how much is going to come from power to liquids and how much is going to come from engineered greenhouse gas removals. And our mission as a power to liquid SAF sector and an eSAF sector is to minimise the call on greenhouse gas removals, because bear in mind that is going to be perpetuating fossil carbon consumption, and crossing our fingers and hoping that for once humanity's taken a long-term view on managing waste as opposed to a short-term view, which we always do. Kind of a horrible analogy, but think about landfills. We thought it was a really good idea to put all of our domestic waste into landfills until about 20 years ago, and then we thought, crikey, that was a really bad idea, and we're digging it back out now and having to remediate these. So the sort of the idea of relying on long-term on engineered greenhouse gas removals to perpetuate fossil hydrocarbon chains is short-termism and extreme. So I think the question is absolutely spot on. We could be putting those electrons to better use, but if we want to fly, and we want to continue to fly, which I think society does, then we have to make some of these compromises.
And I think just the other point that's always important to note with questions around this is that aviation's global warming potential is not just about its CO2 emissions, but about its contrails as well. And just decarbonising the fuel is not going to solve that. So we need to always be conscious of that additional point. Anyone else want to come in on that? Or given the time, we might move to a final question to the panel, which is, with the balance of 2025, what would be the one thing that you would like to see to happen through the balance of this year to improve the use case and the scaling of eSAF, both in the UK, in Europe and globally?
I touched on it briefly before. Actually, from a UK perspective, particularly, it's a whole government approach. We'd just like to see joined up thinking across Invest 2035, the industrial strategy, DESNZ policy on renewable energy and hydrogen economy, DFT on decarbonising, kind of transportation. So joining the dots in a way that actually mobilises the whole of government and society, towards delivering these important projects.
I think the EU needs to move to being agnostic to the CO2 source and also focus on carbon intensity of the fuel. It's ridiculous that you don't get a benefit for being a better CI. You just have to be under a threshold.
Yeah, so for me it will be supporting a couple of projects to get to FID, because then we're in 27 and we have real line of sight of the mandates, and I think then a lot will change.
To me, the number one challenge for bankability of these projects is on the offtake side and securing long-term demand. So I would say for me the key thing is the demand signals, that's sort of getting clarity and certainty on mandates and on revenue certainty mechanisms.
My Christmas wish is just that the price goes down and the volume goes up of renewable electricity.
Very good. Okay, well, if you could all thank the panel for their contributions today.